Imagine walking away from a conversation where nothing negative was said, no argument happened, and no conflict appeared. Yet your mind feels heavy, your thoughts become restless, and your inner peace quietly fades without explanation. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not always come from pain or obvious harm, but often from silent exposure to negative minds and toxic thinking that slowly enters the heart. When you remain around people who live in constant complaint, judgment, or emotional chaos, your mind begins to mirror what it repeatedly experiences, creating overthinking, self-doubt, and inner exhaustion. This message is not about rejecting people or becoming cold to the world, but about freeing your mind through awareness, wisdom, and gentle detachment, so you can protect your peace and live without being controlled by negative people or toxic thoughts anymore. 1. Understand that other people's negativity is not your responsibility. Buddhism teaches that every individual walks through life carrying their own karma, their own mental conditioning, and their own unresolved inner wounds, whether they are aware of them or not. Each person's way of thinking, reacting, and behaving is shaped by their past experiences, fears, attachments, and unhealed pain. When someone around you is constantly negative, emotionally heavy, critical, or pessimistic, it does not mean that you have failed as a friend, partner, or human being. It simply means that they are dealing with their own inner struggles, and those struggles belong to them. Many people unknowingly take on the emotional weight of others because they believe that being compassionate means fixing people, saving them, or carrying their emotional burdens on their own shoulders. Buddhism gently corrects this misunderstanding by teaching that true compassion is rooted in awareness, not self-destruction. When you absorb other people's negativity, your mind slowly becomes exhausted. You begin to feel drained without knowing why. Your thoughts become heavier, your patience grows thinner, and your inner peace starts to fade. This happens because the mind was never meant to carry emotions that are not its own. The Buddha never taught us to sacrifice our inner peace in order to prove our kindness. Instead, he taught balance. He taught that you can be present without being consumed, that you can listen without absorbing pain, and that you can care deeply without allowing another person's emotional instability to enter your inner world and take control of your thoughts. Many people feel guilty when they stop carrying other people's negativity. They worry that they are being selfish, cold, or uncaring. Buddhism teaches that this guilt itself is a form of attachment, an attachment to approval and to the idea that your worth depends on how much you suffer for others. Letting go of this belief is deeply liberating. You begin to understand that everyone must face their own inner work in their own time. You are not responsible for healing wounds that you did not create, and you are not required to sacrifice your mental well-being to keep others emotionally comfortable. When you truly understand that other people's moods, reactions, and emotional storms are not your responsibility, something powerful happens inside you. Your mind becomes calmer because it no longer feels obligated to manage what it cannot control. Your heart becomes lighter because it is no longer burdened by unnecessary emotional weight. You begin to interact with others from a place of clarity instead of exhaustion. This is not emotional distance born from fear or bitterness. It is healthy detachment born from wisdom. Buddhism teaches that when you stop carrying what is not yours, your mind naturally returns to balance, stability, and peace, allowing you to move through life with greater clarity, compassion, and inner strength. 2. Learn that attachment is the root of toxic thinking. Buddhism teaches that attachment is one of the deepest causes of mental suffering, and toxic thinking often begins where attachment quietly takes control of the mind. Attachment does not only mean clinging to people physically, it also means clinging emotionally to expectations, hopes, imagined outcomes, and ideas about how others should behave toward you. When you become attached to how someone should treat you, how they should understand you, or how they should value you, your mind becomes dependent on their actions for its peace. The moment reality fails to meet those expectations, the mind starts producing toxic thoughts, such as resentment, self-doubt, anger, and emotional replay. Many people do not realize that their suffering is not caused directly by others, but by their attachment to how those people should be. You may replay conversations again and again in your mind, wishing you had been treated differently or hoping that someone will suddenly change. This mental repetition slowly poisons the mind, creating overthinking, emotional heaviness, and inner restlessness. Buddhism teaches that attachment keeps the mind trapped in this cycle because it refuses to accept reality as it is. Instead of seeing clearly, the mind fights against what has already happened, and this resistance becomes suffering. Detachment, as taught in Buddhism, is not coldness or emotional shutdown. It is the ability to remain present without being mentally chained. When you practice detachment, you begin to care without clinging and love without dependency. You stop demanding that people behave in a certain way to justify your peace. This does not mean you accept disrespect or mistreatment. It means you stop allowing your inner world to be controlled by external behavior. As attachment loosens, toxic thoughts begin to fade because they no longer have a foundation to stand on. The Buddha taught that peace does not come from controlling people or outcomes, but from understanding the nature of the mind. When you let go of attachment to expectations, your thoughts become lighter and more flexible. You stop forcing meaning where there is none and stop blaming yourself for other people's limitations. Slowly, the mind learns to rest in acceptance rather than resistance. This acceptance is not weakness, it is clarity. It allows you to respond wisely instead of reacting emotionally. As attachment dissolves, you notice a powerful shift within yourself. You begin to experience situations without immediately turning them into personal suffering. You no longer feel the same urge to overthink, explain yourself endlessly, or seek closure from those who cannot offer it. Your mind becomes quieter because it is no longer fighting reality. Buddhism teaches that when attachment fades, toxic thinking naturally loses its grip, and inner peace begins to arise effortlessly, not because the world has changed, but because your relationship with it has. 3. Realize that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Buddhism teaches that inner peace is fragile when it is left unprotected, and much of our suffering comes from allowing too many people access to our thoughts, emotions, fears, and vulnerabilities without awareness. Not everyone who remains in your life is meant to be close to your inner world. Some people stay simply because of habit, shared history, or convenience, while others remain because you are kind, patient, and willing to listen. Over time, this open access can slowly drain your energy if it is given to those who do not respect your emotional boundaries or understand the value of your inner peace. Many people believe that closeness is measured by time spent together or by how long someone has been part of their life. Buddhism gently challenges this belief by teaching that true closeness is measured by how your mind and heart feel in someone's presence. If you consistently feel tense, smaller, misunderstood, or emotionally exhausted after interacting with someone, this is not something to ignore. These feelings are signals from your inner awareness, guiding you to protect yourself rather than questioning your worth. Ignoring these signals often leads to toxic thinking, as the mind becomes confused by the mismatch between kindness and self-respect. When you give unrestricted access to your inner world, you may find yourself constantly explaining your emotions, justifying your boundaries, or suppressing your truth to keep others comfortable. Buddhism teaches that this quiet self-silencing is a form of suffering. It creates inner conflict because the mind knows it is not being honored. Over time, this inner conflict turns into resentment, emotional fatigue, and self-doubt, even when no one has openly harmed you. This is how suffering grows silently, without drama or obvious pain. Protecting your inner world does not mean becoming cold or distant from everyone. It means choosing awareness over obligation. It means recognizing that some people can be part of your life without being part of your inner space. Buddhism encourages mindful distance when closeness disturbs peace. This distance is not punishment, revenge, or rejection. It is a compassionate decision to preserve balance within yourself. When access is limited wisely, your thoughts become clearer and your emotions become more stable. As you begin to protect your inner world, you may notice a sense of guilt arising. This guilt often comes from old conditioning that taught you to prioritize others over yourself at all costs. Buddhism teaches that true kindness includes kindness toward yourself. When you honor your inner space, you create room for calm, clarity, and emotional healing. Toxic thinking loses its strength because your mind is no longer constantly defending itself. In this protected space, peace becomes natural, and your relationships become healthier, not because you give more, but because you give wisely. 4. Stop reacting and begin responding with awareness. Buddhism teaches that most human suffering is not created by what happens to us, but by how automatically and unconsciously we react to what happens. When negative people say hurtful things, criticize us, or create emotional tension, the mind often reacts instantly, without awareness. This reaction can take many forms, such as anger, defensiveness, the urge to explain yourself, or the need to prove that you are right. Although these reactions feel natural in the moment, they quietly trap the mind in a cycle of agitation and exhaustion. Buddhism invites us to break this cycle by cultivating awareness before response. Negative and toxic people often thrive on reactions because reactions give them emotional control. When you react immediately, you allow their words, moods, and behavior to enter your inner world and disturb your peace. The Buddha taught that awareness creates a space between stimulus and response, and within this space lies freedom. When you pause instead of reacting, you reclaim control over your mind. This pause does not mean suppression or denial of emotions. It means observing what arises without being ruled by it. Responding with awareness allows you to choose silence when speaking would create more suffering and calm words when communication is necessary. Silence in Buddhism is not avoidance. It is a form of wisdom. When you stop reacting impulsively, you begin to notice how much energy you were wasting on unnecessary emotional battles. Many arguments, explanations, and justifications dissolve on their own when they are not fed by reaction. Toxic people often lose interest when they realize they cannot provoke emotional responses. The practice of mindful response also protects you from toxic thinking patterns such as rumination and emotional replay. When you react strongly, the mind continues replaying the event long after it has passed, creating inner conflict and mental fatigue. By responding with awareness, you prevent the event from taking root in your mind. The situation ends where it belongs, in the moment, rather than following you into your thoughts. Over time, this practice strengthens inner stability. You become less shaken by negativity because your peace is no longer dependent on external behavior. Buddhism teaches that true strength is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted in awareness. When you stop reacting and start responding with clarity, your mind becomes calmer, your relationships become less draining, and toxic influences gradually lose their power over you. This is not because the world has become kinder, but because your awareness has become stronger. 5. Observe your thoughts instead of believing them. Buddhism teaches that thoughts are not permanent truths, but temporary mental events that arise and pass away within the mind. Yet many people suffer because they automatically believe every thought that appears, especially when they are surrounded by negative people or emotionally draining situations. Toxic environments often give rise to toxic thinking, including self-doubt, fear, resentment, overthinking, and constant mental replay of past conversations. When these thoughts are believed without awareness, they slowly shape your emotions and behavior, creating inner suffering even when no real danger is present. The Buddha taught mindfulness as a way to step out of this trap. Mindfulness means observing thoughts as they arise rather than identifying with them. Instead of saying, "This thought is me," or "This thought defines my reality," you begin to see thoughts as passing clouds in the sky of awareness. They appear due to causes and conditions, and they disappear when those conditions change. This understanding creates distance between you and your thoughts, allowing the mind to relax rather than tighten around them. When you learn to observe thoughts without judgment, you start to notice patterns. You may see how certain people, words, or situations trigger the same negative thoughts repeatedly. This observation brings clarity. You realize that the suffering is not caused by the thought itself, but by the belief in it. The moment belief loosens, the emotional charge weakens. Thoughts that once felt overwhelming begin to lose their authority over your inner state. This practice also protects you from toxic thinking loops, where the mind keeps replaying painful moments, imagined conversations, or future worries. Buddhism teaches that these loops are fueled by attachment to mental stories. By returning to awareness, you gently interrupt the loop without force or resistance. You do not need to fight thoughts or suppress them. You simply allow them to pass without feeding them attention. As this practice deepens, your relationship with your mind transforms. You become less afraid of negative thoughts because you understand their temporary nature. You stop trying to control or escape them, which paradoxically reduces their intensity. Buddhism teaches that freedom comes not from eliminating thoughts, but from no longer being enslaved by them. When you observe rather than believe, the mind becomes quieter, clearer, and more stable. Toxic thinking loses its grip, not because it was defeated, but because it was understood. 6. Choose distance without anger, guilt, or explanation. Buddhism teaches that letting go is one of the most misunderstood acts of wisdom, especially when it comes to people who drain your energy or disturb your peace. Many people believe that distance must come with anger, confrontation, or dramatic endings, but the Buddha showed a much quieter and more powerful path. Distance, when chosen with awareness, does not require hatred, blame, or emotional conflict. It can arise naturally when the mind recognizes that staying close is causing suffering. This kind of distance is not rejection, it is self-respect. One of the main reasons people struggle to create distance from negative individuals is guilt. They feel guilty for stepping back, guilty for saying no, and guilty for choosing their peace over someone else's comfort. Buddhism teaches that this guilt is rooted in attachment to approval and fear of being seen as selfish. However, true selfishness is abandoning your own well-being to maintain unhealthy connections. The Buddha never taught us to remain in situations that disturb the mind just to preserve appearances. He taught us to walk away from suffering with clarity and compassion. Choosing distance does not mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop sacrificing yourself. You can still wish someone well while recognizing that their presence in your life creates imbalance. Buddhism teaches that each person must face their own path and inner work. By constantly staying close to negativity, you interfere with both your own growth and theirs. Distance allows both sides to breathe, reflect, and evolve in their own way. Many people feel the need to explain their distance, to justify their silence, or to defend their boundaries. Buddhism teaches that peace does not require explanation. When your actions come from awareness rather than anger, you do not owe long explanations to those who repeatedly disturb your inner balance. Explaining often invites more arguments, misunderstandings, and emotional manipulation. Quiet distance, on the other hand, closes the door gently without creating new wounds. When you begin to choose distance without anger, you may notice resistance from others. Some people become confused when you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop participating in emotional drama. This resistance can tempt you to return to old patterns out of fear or discomfort. Buddhism teaches patience during this phase. The mind must learn to tolerate the discomfort of change without rushing back into suffering. Over time, this discomfort fades and clarity replaces it. This form of distance also protects you from toxic thinking. When you remain close to negative people, your mind stays on high alert, constantly preparing for emotional impact. Thoughts become defensive, anxious, and reactive. By creating space, you allow the mind to settle. Thoughts slow down. Emotional tension releases. The mind begins to return to its natural state of calm awareness. You realize that much of your suffering was not coming from within, but from prolonged exposure to emotional instability. Buddhism teaches that true peace grows in silence. Silence does not mean avoidance or weakness. It means you are no longer feeding what harms you. When you stop engaging in draining conversations, unnecessary explanations, and emotional battles, your energy is preserved. This preserved energy can then be used for healing, growth, and clarity. Distance becomes a form of self-care, not isolation. As this understanding deepens, you begin to trust yourself more. You no longer feel the need to justify your choices to everyone. You recognize that protecting your peace is not an act against others, but an act for your own well-being. Buddhism teaches that when the mind is protected, compassion becomes purer, actions become wiser, and life becomes lighter. Choosing distance without anger is not running away. It is walking toward balance, stability, and inner freedom. 7. Understand that energy is contagious and shapes the mind. Buddhism teaches that the mind is deeply influenced by what it repeatedly experiences, even when we believe we are strong enough to remain unaffected. Every conversation, environment, and emotional exchange leaves an imprint on the mind. This is why energy is considered contagious in Buddhist wisdom. When you spend extended time around negative people, pessimistic thinking, constant complaints, or emotional chaos, your mind slowly begins to absorb those patterns, not because you are weak, but because the mind naturally mirrors what it is exposed to over time. Many people underestimate how much their surroundings influence their inner state. They believe that as long as they remain silent or try to stay positive, negativity will not affect them. Buddhism gently explains that this belief is unrealistic. The mind is like water. It takes the shape and temperature of the container it is placed in. If you repeatedly place your mind in environments filled with anger, fear, gossip, or emotional instability, the calmness of your inner world gradually erodes. This erosion often happens slowly and quietly, making it difficult to recognize until exhaustion, anxiety, or toxic thinking has already taken root. Negative people do not always appear harmful on the surface. Some are subtle. They may constantly complain, focus on what is wrong, criticize others, or live in a state of quiet dissatisfaction. Over time, listening to these patterns trains your mind to see the world through the same lens. You may notice yourself becoming more judgmental, more anxious, or more mentally tired without understanding why. Buddhism teaches that this is not a personal failure. it is a natural result of prolonged exposure. Awareness of this truth is the first step toward freedom. The Buddha emphasized the importance of right association, meaning the people and environments you choose to keep close. Right association does not mean surrounding yourself only with perfect or happy people. It means choosing connections that encourage clarity, balance, and growth rather than confusion and emotional drain. When the mind is surrounded by calm, it learns calm. When it is surrounded by chaos, it learns chaos. This learning happens unconsciously, shaping thoughts, habits, and emotional reactions without your permission. Many people remain in draining environments because they feel obligated, loyal, or afraid of being misunderstood. Buddhism teaches that loyalty to suffering is not a virtue. Staying in environments that continuously disturb your peace slowly damages your mental well-being. Over time, this damage expresses itself as overthinking, irritability, lack of motivation, and emotional numbness. The mind becomes tired of constant exposure to negativity, even if the negativity is subtle and unintentional. Choosing healthier environments does not mean isolating yourself from the world. It means being mindful of what you allow into your mental space. This includes conversations you engage in, content you consume, and people you give your time to. Buddhism teaches that silence can be a powerful remedy when noise becomes harmful. Moments of solitude, nature, and mindful presence allow the mind to reset and return to balance. In these moments, you begin to remember what peace feels like without external interference. When you begin to reduce exposure to negative energy, you may notice a sense of emptiness at first. This emptiness is often misunderstood. It is not loneliness. It is the absence of constant stimulation and emotional chaos. Buddhism teaches that this emptiness is fertile ground for clarity. In this quiet space, your thoughts slow down, emotions stabilize, and inner awareness deepens. You begin to notice that much of your stress was not coming from within, but from what you were constantly absorbing. This lesson also applies to internal energy. Just as external negativity affects the mind, internal self-talk shapes your inner world. Repeated negative self-judgment, comparison, and mental criticism create the same toxic environment inside the mind. Buddhism teaches that awareness must be applied both outwardly and inwardly. When you notice harsh self-talk, you gently redirect the mind toward understanding rather than punishment. This internal shift is just as important as changing external surroundings. As you become more mindful of energy, you start to choose differently. You may naturally gravitate toward calmer people, peaceful spaces, and meaningful silence. You may feel less interested in drama, gossip, and emotionally draining interactions. This shift is not arrogance or superiority, it is the mind protecting itself. Buddhism teaches that when the mind becomes sensitive to peace, it no longer tolerates chaos easily. Over time, this awareness transforms your entire experience of life. Your thoughts become clearer because they are no longer constantly influenced by negativity. Your emotions become steadier because they are not being triggered repeatedly. Your reactions soften because the mind is no longer overstimulated. This is how energy shapes the mind, and this is how mindful choice restores inner freedom. Buddhism reminds us that peace is not something we force into existence. It emerges naturally when the mind is placed in the right conditions. By understanding that energy is contagious and choosing environments that nourish rather than drain you, you allow your mind to heal without struggle. Toxic thinking fades, not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it. This quiet shift marks a powerful step toward lasting inner peace and emotional freedom. 8. Release the need for validation and approval. Buddhism teaches that one of the quietest sources of suffering in the human mind is the constant search for validation and approval from others. Many people do not realize how deeply this need controls their thoughts, emotions, and decisions. When you seek validation, you allow other people's opinions, reactions, and moods to define your sense of worth. Over time, this creates a fragile inner world that rises and falls based on external feedback. Toxic thinking often begins here because the mind becomes anxious about being accepted, feared of being rejected, and exhausted from constantly adjusting itself to please others. From a Buddhist perspective, the need for validation is rooted in attachment to identity. The mind creates an image of who it wants to be in the eyes of others, and then works endlessly to protect that image. When people praise you, the mind feels uplifted. When people criticize or ignore you, the mind feels wounded. This emotional dependence traps you in a cycle of craving and aversion, which Buddhism identifies as a primary cause of suffering. You crave approval and fear disapproval, and this fear quietly shapes your behavior, your silence, and even your self-expression. Negative and toxic people often gain power over you when they sense this need for validation. They may withhold approval, shift standards, or subtly criticize, knowing that your mind is seeking reassurance. This dynamic creates toxic thinking because the mind begins to overanalyze interactions, replay conversations, and question its own worth. You may find yourself constantly wondering if you said the right thing, acted correctly, or offended someone without meaning to. Buddhism teaches that this mental exhaustion is not caused by the people themselves, but by the attachment to how you want to be perceived. The Buddha taught that true stability comes from self-awareness rather than external affirmation. When you observe the mind closely, you begin to see how often it asks for permission to exist peacefully. It seeks signs of acceptance before relaxing. Buddhism gently invites you to reverse this pattern by grounding your worth internally rather than externally. This does not mean becoming arrogant or indifferent to others. It means recognizing that your value does not increase with praise or decrease with criticism. Your worth is not something that others can give or take away. Letting go of validation does not happen suddenly. It is a gradual process of awareness. At first, you may notice discomfort when approval is absent. The mind may feel uneasy, empty, or insecure. Buddhism teaches that this discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that the mind is breaking free from dependency. Just as the body feels weak before it becomes stronger, the mind feels uncertain before it becomes stable. By staying present with this discomfort instead of escaping it, you allow inner strength to grow. When you release the need for validation, your thoughts begin to change. You stop constantly comparing yourself to others. You stop measuring your worth by attention, responses, or recognition. You become less reactive to praise and less wounded by criticism. This emotional neutrality brings clarity. The mind becomes quieter because it is no longer negotiating its value with the outside world. Toxic thoughts that once revolved around self-doubt and approval lose their intensity because they are no longer being fed. This lesson also transforms relationships. When you no longer seek validation, you interact with others more honestly. You stop performing. You stop suppressing your truth to maintain acceptance. Buddhism teaches that authentic connection arises when the mind is free from fear of rejection. Some people may drift away when you stop seeking their approval. This is not loss, it is alignment. Relationships that depend on your neediness fade, while those rooted in mutual respect remain. Buddhism also teaches that validation seeking often disguises itself as kindness. Many people say yes when they want to say no, stay silent when they want to speak, and tolerate discomfort to avoid disappointing others. Over time, this self-betrayal turns into resentment and toxic thinking. When you release the need for approval, you begin to honor your inner truth. You make decisions based on awareness rather than fear. This shift restores self-respect and emotional balance. Another powerful aspect of this lesson is learning to validate yourself. Buddhism encourages inner acknowledgement rather than external applause. When you act with integrity, awareness, and compassion, you allow yourself to recognize that quietly. You do not need constant reassurance. This self-validation creates emotional independence. The mind becomes stable because it is no longer waiting for signals from others to feel secure. As this practice deepens, you may notice a sense of freedom that feels unfamiliar at first. You no longer feel the urge to explain yourself unnecessarily. You no longer feel compelled to prove your worth. You become comfortable being misunderstood by those who never truly saw you. Buddhism teaches that peace arrives when the mind stops arguing for its existence. In this stillness, confidence grows naturally, not as ego, but as calm self-trust. Releasing the need for validation also protects you from toxic people who manipulate through approval and disapproval. When they can no longer control your emotions through praise or criticism, their influence weakens. You remain steady regardless of how they behave. This steadiness is deeply freeing. It allows you to move through life without emotional dependence, making your inner peace unshakable. In the end, Buddhism reminds us that the mind becomes peaceful when it stops outsourcing its worth. When validation comes from within, the outside world loses its power to disturb you. Toxic thinking fades because the mind no longer doubts its right to exist calmly. You become lighter, clearer, and more grounded. This freedom does not come from becoming more liked. It comes from becoming more aware. When approval is no longer needed, peace becomes natural, and the mind rests in quiet strength. 9. Practice compassion without betraying yourself. Buddhism teaches compassion as a central pillar of wisdom, but compassion is often misunderstood in a way that quietly creates suffering. Many people believe that being compassionate means tolerating emotional harm, staying in draining relationships, or continuously forgiving behavior that repeatedly disturbs their peace. This misunderstanding causes deep inner conflict because the heart wants to be kind, while the mind feels exhausted and unsafe. The Buddha never taught compassion as self-erasure. He taught compassion rooted in clarity, balance, and awareness. True compassion begins with understanding suffering, but understanding suffering does not mean volunteering to be wounded by it. When someone behaves negatively, manipulatively, or emotionally irresponsibly, Buddhism encourages you to see their actions as expressions of their inner confusion and pain. This understanding softens anger and resentment, allowing forgiveness to arise naturally. However, forgiveness does not require continued exposure. You can recognize someone's suffering without remaining close to its effects. This distinction is essential for inner peace. Many people betray themselves by staying silent when they feel hurt, saying yes when their entire being wants to say no, and minimizing their own pain to protect others' feelings. Over time, this self-betrayal turns into resentment, emotional numbness, and toxic thinking. The mind becomes divided because it knows the truth, but refuses to honor it. Buddhism teaches that inner harmony cannot exist when you consistently ignore your own boundaries. Compassion that excludes yourself becomes imbalance, and imbalance always leads to suffering. Practicing compassion without self-betrayal means allowing yourself to acknowledge pain honestly. It means admitting when a situation no longer feels healthy instead of spiritualizing your tolerance. The Buddha taught that awareness must be honest to be liberating. When you suppress discomfort under the label of kindness, the mind does not become peaceful. It becomes tense and conflicted. Compassion guided by awareness allows you to be kind without abandoning your inner safety. One of the most powerful aspects of Buddhist compassion is non-attachment. Non-attachment allows you to wish others well without needing to stay entangled in their emotional patterns. You can let go of the need to correct, rescue, or heal someone who is not ready to heal themselves. This release is not cruelty, it is wisdom. Every individual must walk their own path, face their own karma, and awaken at their own pace. When you interfere excessively, you delay both their growth and your own peace. This lesson also teaches you to recognize emotional manipulation disguised as vulnerability. Some people unconsciously use their pain to maintain control, sympathy, or closeness. Buddhism teaches discernment alongside compassion. Discernment allows you to see when empathy is being used to trap you in guilt or obligation. When compassion lacks discernment, it becomes a doorway for exploitation. When compassion includes discernment, it becomes a source of strength and clarity. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as reconciliation. Buddhism separates the two. Forgiveness is an inner release of resentment and anger. Reconciliation is a decision about continued closeness. You can forgive someone completely while choosing distance. This choice protects your peace while freeing your heart from bitterness. The Buddha taught that holding on to resentment harms the holder more than the target, but he never taught that wisdom requires returning to harm. As you practice compassion without self-betrayal, your inner dialogue begins to change. You stop blaming yourself for others' reactions. You stop questioning your worth because someone failed to treat you well. You begin to trust your inner signals instead of dismissing them. This trust restores self-respect, which is essential for mental stability. Toxic thinking fades because the mind is no longer trapped in confusion between kindness and self-protection. This balance also transforms how you respond to difficult people. Instead of reacting with anger or submission, you respond with calm clarity. You may speak less. You may step back quietly. You may choose silence over explanation. Buddhism teaches that silence can be compassionate when words would create more suffering. This silence is not passive. It is deliberate and grounded in awareness. Over time, practicing compassion without self-betrayal strengthens inner boundaries without hardening the heart. You become gentle but firm, kind but clear, open but protected. Your relationships become healthier because they are no longer built on guilt or obligation. Some connections may fall away naturally when you stop overgiving. This is not loss, it is alignment. What remains is more authentic and peaceful. The Buddha taught that inner peace is not achieved by pleasing everyone or absorbing endless suffering. It is achieved by understanding the nature of the mind and acting in harmony with that understanding. When you practice compassion wisely, you free yourself from emotional exhaustion while remaining humane and kind. You no longer feel torn between caring for others and caring for yourself. This inner alignment brings deep relief. In the end, compassion without self-betrayal allows you to move through the world with a light heart and a steady mind. You forgive without reopening wounds. You understand without surrendering boundaries. You care without carrying what is not yours. Buddhism teaches that this balance is not only possible, it is necessary for true freedom. When compassion includes yourself, toxic thinking dissolves, emotional clarity returns, and the mind rests in quiet strength. 10. Remember that inner peace is the highest form of freedom. Buddhism teaches that true freedom is not found in controlling people, changing circumstances, or eliminating negativity from the world, because the world will always contain difficult people, unpredictable events, and uncomfortable situations. The Buddha taught that freedom begins and ends within the mind. When inner peace is stable, external negativity loses its power. When inner peace is fragile, even small disturbances can feel overwhelming. Understanding this truth is essential for freeing yourself from negative people and toxic thinking. Many people spend their lives trying to arrange the outside world so that they can finally feel calm. They hope certain people will change, certain problems will disappear, or certain situations will improve. Buddhism teaches that this approach leads to endless frustration because the mind becomes dependent on conditions it cannot fully control. Negative people may leave your life, but new challenges will appear. Toxic situations may end, but uncertainty will always remain. When peace depends on external conditions, it can never last. The Buddha taught that inner peace comes from understanding the nature of the mind and no longer being ruled by it. Toxic thinking thrives when the mind believes it must react to everything, fix everything, and carry everything. This constant engagement creates exhaustion. When you learn to rest in awareness rather than reaction, the mind begins to settle. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer dominate your inner world. Emotions still appear, but they no longer control your behavior. This is where true freedom begins. Inner peace does not mean emotional numbness or indifference. It means clarity without chaos. It means feeling emotions fully without being overwhelmed by them. Buddhism teaches that peace is not the absence of feelings, but the absence of inner resistance. When you stop fighting what is happening inside you, the mind naturally calms. Negative people lose their influence because they no longer trigger emotional storms. Toxic thoughts lose their grip because they are no longer believed automatically. One of the most powerful realizations in Buddhism is that nothing outside you can disturb your peace without your participation. This does not mean you blame yourself for suffering. It means you reclaim your power. When you understand that your reactions are choices rather than reflexes, you begin to experience freedom. You may still encounter criticism, rejection, or misunderstanding, but these experiences pass through you instead of settling inside you. The mind becomes spacious rather than tight. Many people fear inner peace because they associate it with passivity or weakness. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Inner peace requires courage. It requires letting go of familiar suffering patterns, releasing the need to be right, and abandoning the habit of emotional struggle. This courage allows you to stop engaging in unnecessary battles, stop explaining yourself to those who do not listen, and stop proving your worth to those who cannot see it. In this release, peace grows stronger. Inner peace also transforms how you view negative people. Instead of seeing them as enemies or obstacles, you begin to see them as teachers. They reveal where attachment still exists, where boundaries are weak, and where awareness needs strengthening. This perspective does not excuse harmful behavior, but it removes hatred from the heart. Buddhism teaches that hatred binds the mind to suffering, while understanding frees it. When peace is present, negativity no longer feels personal. As inner peace deepens, your life naturally becomes simpler. You speak less, but with more intention. You react less, but with more clarity. You choose your energy carefully and your attention wisely. Toxic thinking fades because the mind is no longer cluttered with unnecessary noise. Silence becomes nourishing rather than empty. Solitude becomes grounding rather than lonely. This simplicity is not forced. It arises naturally when the mind stops chasing disturbance. The Buddha taught that peace is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is something you practice daily through awareness, patience, and compassion. There will still be moments of disturbance, moments of doubt, and moments of emotional pain. The difference is that these moments no longer define you. You return to peace more quickly because you know where it lives. You stop identifying with suffering and start recognizing it as a temporary state. When inner peace becomes your priority, your relationships change. You no longer tolerate disrespect in the name of harmony. You no longer overgive in the hope of being valued. You no longer shrink yourself to keep others comfortable. Buddhism teaches that peace and self-respect grow together. When you honor your inner calm, you naturally set healthier boundaries without aggression or guilt. This balance attracts relationships that are more aligned and releases those that are not. Ultimately, Buddhism teaches that the greatest victory is not over others, but over the restless mind. When the mind is free, the world cannot imprison you. Negative people may exist, but they cannot control you. Toxic thoughts may arise, but they cannot dominate you. Inner peace becomes your refuge, not as an escape from life, but as a stable ground within it. This is the highest form of freedom, not freedom from problems, but freedom from being ruled by them. Not freedom from people, but freedom from their emotional grip. When you rest in inner peace, you carry clarity wherever you go. Buddhism teaches that this peace is not something you need to earn. It is your natural state, waiting to be remembered. When you return to it, life becomes lighter, the mind becomes quieter, and freedom becomes real. 11. Live in awareness so negativity can no longer control you. Buddhism teaches that the ultimate freedom from negative people and toxic thinking does not come from changing others, escaping the world, or building emotional walls, but from living in deep awareness. Awareness is the foundation that holds every lesson together. Without awareness, boundaries collapse, attachment grows stronger, and the mind becomes reactive. With awareness, the mind becomes steady, clear, and self-directed. This is why the Buddha emphasized awareness as the path that leads beyond suffering rather than temporary relief from it. Living in awareness means recognizing what is happening inside you the moment it begins to arise. When negativity enters your space, awareness notices the tension before it turns into anger. When toxic thoughts appear, awareness sees them before they become belief. When emotional exhaustion starts to build, awareness feels it before burnout takes over. Most suffering continues because the mind is unaware until it is already overwhelmed. Buddhism teaches that awareness interrupts suffering at its root. Many people believe they are trapped by negative people, but Buddhism gently reveals a deeper truth. You are not trapped by people, you are trapped by unconscious reactions. When awareness is absent, the mind reacts automatically based on habit, fear, attachment, and conditioning. Old wounds get activated, old patterns repeat. The same emotional cycles replay again and again. Awareness breaks this cycle not by force, but by light. When something is clearly seen, it no longer has the same power. Living in awareness also means noticing how often the mind abandons the present moment. Toxic thinking thrives when the mind lives in the past or the imagined future. It replays old conversations, regrets words that were spoken, and fears what might happen next. Buddhism teaches that suffering cannot survive in full presence. When awareness returns to the present moment, the mind has nowhere to cling. In the present, there is breath. There is sensation. There is life unfolding exactly as it is. This presence dissolves mental noise naturally. Awareness also teaches you to recognize your limits without shame. You begin to notice when your energy is low, when your patience is thin, and when your inner world needs rest. Instead of forcing yourself to endure more negativity, you step back consciously. Buddhism teaches that wisdom includes knowing when to stop. Awareness allows you to honor your capacity instead of exceeding it and then blaming yourself for exhaustion. When awareness becomes your way of living, you stop asking why people are the way they are and start observing how their behavior affects your mind. This shift is powerful. You no longer personalize negativity. You see it as a condition, not a verdict on your worth. The mind becomes less defensive and more spacious. Toxic people may still speak or act the same way, but your inner world no longer reacts automatically. Their behavior passes through awareness without leaving a wound. Awareness also dissolves the illusion that you must constantly engage. Many people feel obligated to respond, explain, justify, or defend themselves. Buddhism teaches that awareness gives you choice. You realize that not every message requires a reply, not every opinion deserves attention, and not every emotion needs expression. Silence becomes intentional rather than fearful. Distance becomes mindful rather than avoidant. Your actions become aligned with clarity instead of habit. As awareness deepens, compassion also transforms. You still understand others' suffering, but you no longer confuse understanding with endurance. You stop betraying yourself in the name of kindness. You care without carrying. You forgive without reopening wounds. Buddhism teaches that compassion guided by awareness is sustainable, while compassion without awareness leads to burnout. This balanced compassion allows you to remain humane without becoming depleted. Living in awareness also means recognizing when the mind is seeking control. Toxic thinking often arises from the desire to control outcomes, people, and perceptions. Awareness gently reveals this craving. You begin to see how much tension is created by wanting things to be different. When this craving is seen clearly, it loosens. The mind relaxes. Acceptance arises, not as resignation, but as clarity. Acceptance does not mean you like everything. It means you stop fighting reality internally. Over time, awareness becomes your inner anchor. Even when emotions rise, they no longer sweep you away. Even when negativity appears, it no longer defines your experience. You learn to return to awareness again and again, just as the Buddha taught. This return is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is simple. It is powerful. Each return weakens suffering and strengthens freedom. Buddhism teaches that awareness is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is a living practice. Some days it feels strong, some days it feels distant. The key is patience. Every moment of awareness, no matter how brief, shifts the mind toward freedom. Every time you notice instead of react, you reclaim power. Every time you pause instead of engage, you protect peace. As you live in awareness, your relationship with life changes. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances and start experiencing yourself as a witness to them. This witnessing does not disconnect you from life. It grounds you in it. You become fully present without being emotionally consumed. Buddhism teaches that this is the middle path between avoidance and attachment, between numbness and overwhelm. In this state, negativity no longer defines you. Toxic thoughts still arise, but they are recognized as temporary. Negative people still exist, but they no longer live inside your mind. Your inner world becomes your refuge, not because it is perfect, but because it is conscious. Awareness becomes the space in which peace can exist, regardless of conditions. This is the final freedom Buddhism offers. Not freedom from life, but freedom within it. When awareness becomes your way of living, nothing has the power to enslave your mind. You walk through the world steady, grounded, and clear. You no longer fight negativity, you outgrow it. You no longer escape toxic thinking, you see through it. This is not the end of the path. It is the beginning of living awake. Buddhism teaches that freedom from negative people and toxic thinking does not arrive suddenly or dramatically. It arrives quietly through understanding, awareness, and the courage to protect your inner world without anger or guilt. As you reflect on these lessons, it becomes clear that suffering was never truly caused by others alone, but by unconscious reactions, attachment, and the habit of carrying what was never meant to be yours. When you begin to see clearly, the burden starts to lift naturally, without force or resistance. You learn that you are not required to absorb negativity to prove kindness, that attachment creates mental suffering, and that not everyone deserves access to your inner space. You understand that reacting drains your energy, while awareness restores it. You realize that thoughts are temporary visitors, not truths, and that distance can be chosen peacefully without explanation. You see how energy shapes the mind, how validation weakens inner stability, and how compassion must include yourself to remain pure. Finally, you recognize that inner peace and awareness are the highest forms of freedom, stronger than any external influence. Buddhism does not ask you to become hard, cold, or disconnected from the world. It invites you to become awake, awake to what nourishes you and what drains you, awake to what deserves your energy and what quietly steals it, awake to the difference between kindness and self-betrayal. This awakening does not isolate you from life. It allows you to move through life with clarity, balance, and calm strength. Negative people may still exist, and toxic thoughts may still arise, but they no longer define your experience. They pass through awareness without leaving scars. Your mind becomes a place of refuge rather than conflict. You stop fighting the world and start understanding yourself. In this understanding, peace settles naturally, not as an escape from reality, but as a grounded presence within it. The Buddha taught that peace is not found by changing the world, but by seeing it clearly. When you stop carrying what is not yours, stop believing every thought, and stop seeking approval for your existence, you return to your natural state. This state is calm, steady, and free. From here, your actions become wiser, your relationships healthier, and your life lighter. Remember that this path is not about perfection. Some days the mind will still react. Some days old patterns will return. Buddhism teaches patience with yourself. Each moment of awareness is a step forward. Each time you choose peace over reaction, you strengthen your freedom. Over time, these small moments become a new way of living. When you live with awareness, negativity loses its power. When you honor your inner peace, toxicity no longer has a place to settle. This is not because the world has changed, but because you have. And in this quiet transformation, you discover the deepest truth Buddhism offers. When the mind is free, nothing outside can imprison you.